Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and today we're visiting with Deb DeArmond, co-author with her husband Ron of a new book called Don't Go to Bed Angry, Stay Up and Fight. Deb, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Eric.
Deb is a highly experienced and sought-after executive coach, trainer, and facilitator, having worked in marketplace ministry with audiences at all levels across a broad spectrum of industries and organizations. She's an expert in the field of leadership, communication, and relationship and conflict resolution. She owns DeArmond and Associate, dedicated to helping others build successful solutions to the challenges they're facing. Deb is the co-founder of mypurposenow.org, a website for Christian women 50 and over. She's a staff writer for the online magazine Destiny in Bloom, and her writing is regularly featured at Living Better at 50 Plus, also an online magazine. She's been published in Whoa, or is it Whoa?
It is Whoa.
Whoa, WHOA magazine and Dallas Family magazine. And her husband has been a follower of the Messiah since age 12, studied the Bible for 45 years, previously served in ministry positions with Christians Men's Network, Faithful Men Ministry, and has ministered internationally teaching men's curriculum. He's currently the director of men's ministry at Catch the Fire, Dallas-Fort Worth. Ron and Deb have been together for more than 40 years and live in Euless, Texas. So quite a story of a long-term marriage, both of you incorporating faith both into the marriage, into the marketplace. You, in your own right, very well published and successful author with such titles as I Choose You Today and Related by Chance, Family by Choice, talking about mother and daughter-in-law relationships. But your new book, Don't Go to Bed Angry, Stay Up and Fight, is the first book you wrote with Ron as your co-author.
Yes.
Culminating over 40 years of marriage into a book that either you wrote as a dedication to how you survived 40 years or as a handbook, a guideline for those that are struggling to figure out the number one problem in marriage, which is communication.
Yes.
You come from a home which, as you shared with me before we opened, your father was Jewish, your mother was Christian.
Yes.
You were raised in a Christian home, but with a culturally Jewish flavor to it.
Yes, always.
So it gave you kind of an interesting view of what we would put as secular Judaism, not as religious or rabbinical Judaism
right.
From an observance perspective. But it allowed you to help create a part of your identity, the fabric of who you are.
Absolutely.
So quite exciting. Where did you and Ron meet?
We met in high school, believe it or not. We lived in a small Southern California town, and we had known each other throughout our high school years, but in our senior year, I think something just sort of shifted, and he walked up to me one day with his best friend and said to his friend, "That's her," and turned around and walked off. And I said, "That's her what?" And he just kind of smiled over his shoulder, and we began dating around Christmas time of our senior year. And I went home after that first date, Rabbi, and told my mother, "That's the boy I'm going to marry." She didn't believe me, but I knew.
So where did life take the two of you? Did you stay together? Did you go off to college? How did this all come about? Because based on just doing the math and all of this, puts Ron in his late 50s.
Early 60s, both of us.
Early 60s.
We married at age 19, which was not a predictor for a long and happy marriage. But part of what you shared in my introduction is accurate, that I grew up in a Christian home, But to be honest with you, when I met Ron, he began asking me questions about my faith. And not only did I not know the answers to them, I didn't understand many of the questions. I grew up in a non-denominational Protestant church, and I knew the stories of the Bible, but I didn't really know the storyteller. And when he began really asking me some deep things about what I believed, I struggled to articulate that. And I was not happy about that. That church had been central in my life. The people there were important. But on the night before we graduated, he led me to the Lord. And so that sort of set in place, I think, a very solid foundation. After high school, he did go to Bible school in Michigan, discovered that a California boy in Michigan could freeze really easily, and he came back to finish in California. I went to a local state college in California, but we finished the first 2 years and then we married. And as I say, at 19, I can remember my older brother who said, "You have no clue what you're doing." And I thought I did at the time, but it proved out that there was much to learn.
So here you are, you confront something that many people are confronting today, is that the church is doing an outstanding job of creating a building, a place of gathering, exchange of concepts, but not a developer of relationship with God. It becomes knowing about God, but not knowing God.
Absolutely. It was a wonderful community of people, loving, caring, most of whom exuded what I would consider Christ-like characteristics and traits. I became a member of the church when I turned 14, and it was the foundation, youth group, all of those things were important. And so hearing Bible verses was a constant, and learning the Bible. But how did that translate into a relationship with Jesus? It was never presented that a conscious decision for Christ was a necessity. And so it was a surprise to me. Ron was instrumental in helping me understand my faith and then make a decision.
So it started out where he was the spiritual head of the relationship.
Yes, and has filled that role it'll be 42 years. We're married in July, 42 years, and we dated for 2 years before we married. So it's a long, long time. And we raised 3 sons, and believe that they also have become the spiritual head in their homes. Out of those 3 sons, I have 6 grandsons, so we have a legacy of males. But number 7, due in October, is going to be a girl, and I'm a little excited about that.
I'm sure you are. When you realized that you were drawn to Ron, was the faith component, now that in retrospect, at 17, it's hormones and attraction and all that, but in retrospect, do you find that that was one of the attractive qualities that drew you to him?
I would definitely say yes, although I would not have attributed it to it initially. He was just one of the nicest, most respectful, honorable people I had ever known in high school. As you said, young males are not typically in that category. And I just found him to be unique and different from so many of the other guys that we went to school with. And as I got to know him better and began to understand the place that faith played in his life, it was easy to make those connections. So I would say yes.
As you began to develop both as a mother, a wife, and then as someone who became familiar with leadership, organizational development, conflict resolution, making your career as a arbiter of resolution. Here you were apparently brought into situations of conflict.
Sure. Marriage, if you don't have any conflict in marriage, it means typically that one person has sort of disappeared. I really look back and can see how different Ron and I are wired, how differently God has gifted us. And that can be a terrible point of conflict, or it can be an incredible place of strength. And it really depends on our willingness to see and honor what God has placed in the other person, and not so much to explain our perspective, but to be willing to draw understanding from the other person. We're not going to always agree on things, but no one around here is ever going to be able to say, gee, I didn't know you felt that way. At our 40th anniversary celebration 2 years ago, each of our sons asked for some time at the microphone. That was a little scary because we didn't know what they were going to say. And our oldest son started by saying, I lived in a house of honest conversation. Not always quiet conversation, but honest. He said, you knew where mom and dad stood with one another, where they stood with the Lord, and where you stood with them. He said it was a great place to have the opportunity to grow and understand what life could bring. So that was a great tribute.
That's an outstanding tribute. But which came first for you? The corporate environment of leadership and conflict resolution, or seeing something at home that could apply outside the home?
Do you know, I think really it even began before we married. Ron and I talked things through. He grew up in a very different environment than I did, Rabbi. He grew up in a blended family with an alcoholic stepfather, and if you had an opinion, you should probably just keep it to yourself if you were going to be safe. And he asked me one day, after we'd been dating for about 6 months, he said, do you know what drew me to you? I said, no. He said, you were interested in what I thought, what I believed, what I wanted to say. You wanted to understand who I am. And he said, that had never happened in my life prior to my relationship with you. And so I think I have a natural curiosity about people and about how they're wired and what's important to them. And through that process, we really did learn that although we might not agree on things, we wanted to understand where the other person was. And that was even before we married. In fact, my mother said to me at one point, I asked her, we were so young when we got married, and I think this was maybe 5 years into our marriage. Why were you and Dad so comfortable? She said, you're not an easy person, Deb. You're opinionated and strong-willed, and you're Dad's daughter. But she said, if you and Ron ever had a disagreement, we never knew about it. You never came home and said, well, if he calls, I'm not here, or you never gave him back his ring. And she said, I figured if the two of you were managing those kinds of conversations that well, you better hang on and marry him. You might not ever find another one to put up with you.
Kind of an interesting assessment.
Yeah.
But what it sounds like is that there was an environment of open exploration.
There was.
That you wanted to know the other position on various matters, and you made or created an environment where there were no taboos. There were no subjects which were off limits. I
would agree with that assessment. I think that so often, the word talks about the power of agreement, Amos 3:3. How can two walk together unless they're in agreement? And that is the ultimate goal of that exchange. But the interim goal before that is I want to understand your perspective. I don't want to push mine. I don't want to campaign for mine. I want to understand yours. And I hope that you will allow me to be understood as well. When we genuinely understand one another, we can usually come to a fairly quick solution. And most often our experience is it's a little bit mine and a little bit his and a whole lot of the word, and we find ourselves in a place of agreement. But if I start out with the desire to win in that conversation, I'm going to create a loser. And that loser would be my husband. And I don't want to be married to a loser, Rabbi.
Right. Do you find that in these open dialogues that you see or hear a perspective that you were unaware existed because we frame our worldview based on our own experiences, based on our own sphere of knowledge?
Yes.
the world we come from.
Yes,
Well,
and then we add to that as a married couple. We begin to create, we've been married longer and have lived together far longer than we ever lived in our home of origin with our parents and our siblings. And so you begin to create those experiences there as well. But because we think so differently, he's an engineer by education and worked as an engineer for many years along with his work in the ministry. I'm very differently gifted than he is. And so he'll see a perspective that I will completely miss. And that shared perspective is our strength, because then we really do see sort of the biggest picture possible.
So, different point of view, different perspective, different foundation does not create in itself a problem.
Well, it can if you're not skilled. It can if you're not clear about what the Word expects of us from as a married couple as far as conduct. I've been asked a lot of times, what if you can't come to an agreement? After all the understanding has taken place, you still have a different perspective. If we cannot locate it in the Word, then I'm happy to allow him to make that decision, knowing that that's the position God's asked him to be in, and I'm glad, frankly, that it's not mine. And that's an important part of it. There have been times when he has deferred to my perspective, and many times I've deferred to his after the conversation, after prayer together, and there's peace there. There's absolute peace there.
Can you think of I like to share with the audience as much as we can, kind of detailed scenarios, not delving into your personal life, of course,
sure,
but as you go out there to teach, as you use examples of how problems occur, how problems can be resolved, how an open dialogue should sound when there's a foundation of mutual respect, and how so often men feel that any question is a challenge, any question is an attack, any question is something that must be defended as opposed to explored.
Sure.
That's the nature of many men that I've counseled. Then there is that do whatever you want, as long as I don't have to deal with it, you do it. And then if there's fallout, well, that's when he gets involved.
Right.
And there has to be a balance struck. How do you figure out who you are, first of all? Because if I don't know who I am, then I'm a stranger playing a part in the strange play.
Right. Right.
So is the beginning of this process Deb getting to know who Deb is and Ron getting to know who Ron is? Or was this concept of marriage as God created it, that for this reason a man shall leave his mother and father and cleave to his wife, and they shall become one? Right. Meaning that there isn't a Deb, there isn't a Ron, there's a drawn, and it's a new creation.
Well, it is a new creation. I mean, marriage is a merger. And when you look up the word merge in the dictionary, it says to cut away to make a place for something else, which already sounds like it could be a little bit painful.
Right.
But when God talks about leaving and cleaving, that message, I believe, is as much for the couple as it is for their families.
Oh, yes.
Because the leave and cleave's not possible if mamas won't let go, if daddies try to interfere on behalf of their daughters or to defend their sons. And so we were very, very blessed to have the situation where our parents really did take a step back and encouraged us. We're there for counsel and advice if we sought it from them, but never imposed it on us. And that really did leave us free to become who God called us to be.
Did you have a wedding in a church with a center aisle?
No, we had a church with two aisles.
Okay.
It was a large center section with two smaller sections. We came up the left and went down the right.
Okay.
Why do you ask?
Most people don't know the origin of the walking down the aisle and how all that came to be a tradition. It's very, very significant. The first is that the groom comes down before the bride.
Yes.
And in traditional setting, let's just say the center aisle setting, the groom's family is on one side, the bride's family is on the other side. You think it's an interesting, odd thing, but it's custom, it's tradition, but it's actually very biblical. As he makes that journey, he is saying to his family, this is the last time you will ever see me. This is the end of my covenant with you.
Interesting.
The bride walks down and she makes a similar journey with a similar statement to the other side, says, this is the last time you will see me. This is the end of my covenant with you. Now, where is that in the Bible? God speaks to Abraham and he says, Abraham, I'm going to confirm my covenant with you. I instruct you to take the animals, cut them in two.
Right.
And I will pass through the divide, and I will confirm my covenant with you. Now, you will then confirm your covenant with me through circumcision, okay, through a cut.
Yeah.
And your seed will pass through the cut, through this covenant. And the first seed to pass through that covenant will be the son of the promise. The first seed to pass through, the cut was Isaac. Abraham was not circumcised at the conception of Ishmael. Isaac was the son of the promise. He was the first to pass through. Now, what happens? The bride is escorted to the groom. The groom lifts the veil. Why? Because he's checking to see whether he's getting Rachel or Leah. Okay? That is the origin of the veil ceremony, that now you inspect before you receive. Now they make a covenant. They now walk back between the same people that they made the independent journey, and now when they make that journey together, they are confirming their covenant with each other. And they are saying, and why do they say these words? Ladies and gentlemen, I now present to you Mr. and Mrs., because they're telling you that the people, the individual people that you met who journeyed down for that last journey, they don't exist anymore.
Interesting.
They now exist, and when they pass through, they're saying, we don't belong to you, and we don't belong to you. We belong to each other. And as we pass through the divide, we're confirming our covenant with each other. And it is such a beautiful biblical picture.
It is, absolutely.
And we've lost the richness of it, because when I explained and did premarital counseling, explained this to people, they wept. The parents wept. The families wept, because it was so biblically significant. And this is the message that God is sending. We're talking with Deb DeArmond, author of, or co-author with her husband Ron, of Don't Go to Bed Angry, Stay Up and Fight. It's a title, it's a message, it's not a how to win a fight, it's not a battle plan, it actually is a tool. You hear about fair fighting, you hear about how can you resolve conflict without having somebody lose. We've always defined conflict as win and lose. The entire premise of this book is that you come out united, and therefore the marriage wins. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back with Deb DeArmond to talk about Don't Go to Bed Angry, Stay Up and Fight. We'll be right back. Shalom. I'm the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, Executive Director of Igniting a Nation and host of the daily TV program Revealing the Truth, seen live every Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Central Standard Time at www.ianbn.com and then replayed throughout the day and night via our website. All of our segments can be seen on the Igniting a Nation YouTube channel. Since our launch in January of this year, we've expanded our global reach to over 54 countries with a social media following of over 125,000. Our commitment is to bring you the most in-depth interviews with authors, subject matter experts, and thought leaders from around the world. We have interviewed guests from Israel, Brazil, England, India, and all across North America. All of our authors are featured on the Books and Media page on our website, www.ianbn.com. There you can find a direct link to the book you want to order, and we receive a small commission directly from Amazon. There is no cost to you for this service. In addition to our daily teachings and interviews, we make available to you the archive of all of the interviews on our YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram channels. Our live program is available from our homepage, and there is never a charge to you for any of this access. We made the decision long ago that we would remain a commercial-free resource that would not be influenced by any pressure from any outside company. There are only two ways that we are able to continue to operate this ministry and provide you with the only live 4-hour daily Christian television talk show program. The first is through your support and tax-deductible contributions to Igniting a Nation. These can be made directly through the donate button on the website or sent through the mail to Igniting a Nation, 2700 Corporate Drive, Suite 120, Birmingham, Alabama, 35242. The other way we support the program is by offering you a unique opportunity to have access to over 10 years worth of teachings on a subscription basis. The teaching archives contains all of my prior sermons, Torah studies, prophecy in the news videos, and much more for the low subscription price of $5 per month. This subscription grants you unlimited access to over 800 hours of content not available elsewhere and is updated weekly with the most current prophecy classes. In addition to 20 hours of original TV programming each weekday, we invite you to join us live every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday evenings for our Prophecy in the News classes. The times and locations are listed on our events page on the website www.ianbn.com. Every day you and I are faced with the challenge of where we will go to hear the truth. We are committed to bring you the only program of its kind that covers the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. We cannot do this without your support. Since we launched on January 5th, 2017, we have aired over 300 individual teachings, interviews, and commentaries not available anywhere else. We are now working side by side with almost every major Christian publishing house to bring you the most in-depth feature interviews possible. Our 1-hour features address every subject that affects the believer's life. We are hearing of salvations from the Middle East, Africa, and all across the United States. Lives are being changed every day, and we have only just begun. Our mission is to become your trusted resource and grant you access to the people, tools, and information you need to grow in your relationship with the Lord. You can help us by liking us on social media and through your financial support. We know you have many choices in who you support, but we are prayerfully asking you to consider helping us keep revealing the truth, true to our calling, to cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth like no other program available. Donate today and help us bring the message to the four corners of the earth. Visit www.ianbn.com and donate, buy a book, or subscribe to our teaching archives. Without you, we do not exist. Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and today we're visiting with Deb DeArmond, co-author with her husband Ron of the book, Don't Go to Bed Angry, Stay Up and Fight. Deb, welcome back to the program.
Thanks so much.
Deb, you've been out, the book released just 2 weeks ago, May the 2nd. but yet you've been using these techniques in your own marriage. You've been using them in coaching sessions, counseling sessions, congregational sessions, teaching environments. What have you seen take place, first in your own marriage, by applying these techniques, and then some stories you can share with us about some individuals that you've walked them through this process and you've seen great success?
Well, as we talked about earlier, we do bring so much of where we've been and how we've lived and our parental sort of examples to our lives. And that becomes a frame. And we have to really work hard, I think, to examine whether that frame, whether that baggage that we brought with us maybe ought to be just left on the carousel to go around a few more times. My husband and I grew up in very different environments. And so we really, from the beginning, knew that there were pieces that worked that we had lived, and then there were a lot of pieces that did not work. And among those was the idea that all conflict was a bad thing. If my parents ever had conflict, I was never aware of it. And we didn't live in a house that was so big that I couldn't have overheard it. And so I had no frame for marital conflict resolution. Ron lived in a house where there was a lot of conflict, but it was managed in a very unhealthy way. And so we knew coming together, we really needed to have some framework. And we looked to the Word for that. And as many young couples in counseling, premarital counseling, where we were given that advice, don't go to bed angry. Don't let the sun go down on your wrath. And that became one of the pieces that we really held to, especially in those first few years. But I don't know about you, Rabbi, but if we've not come to some sort of an agreement, 3:17 a.m. is probably not going to be the magic moment when we're exhausted and we're worn out, and now we've almost forgotten what the original conflict was about.
Right.
And so as we began unpacking that truth a bit, the Word is very clear. Don't go to bed angry. It doesn't say don't go to bed until you have a resolution you can both support. It says get rid of the anger. It's possible to kind of call a timeout and say, look, we've now kind of moved beyond what a healthy agreement or healthy discussion looks like. I think we're frustrated with one another. I'm sure God's not pleased with our behavior. I will forgive you, and I ask for you to do the same for me. Can we come back at this tomorrow morning when we're clear-headed and have had some rest? That's really, for us, it's about the being angry that God doesn't want us to go to bed on. It doesn't require us to have solved the problems that we were working on. So once we took that off the table, it changed the dynamic of those conversations, because now we were clear-headed, rested, and able to look at it with a little bit of distance that the night's sleep provides. And so that was probably the most important thing we started with.
You know, it's never occurred to me in this dynamic that you could actually address, we have an issue, we don't have to actually duke it out.
Right.
And not go to bed until there's a resolution.
Right.
But we can agree to set up a time, even allow for time to pass by to clarify our position on it, and then get back together and again discuss it.
Absolutely.
Now, it seems so logical and so practical, but it sounds so brand new to me.
Well, I think it sounds brand new to a lot of us who have spent time in the church and have had that scripture explained to us in a way that I just don't think is there, and that we certainly found didn't support good dialogue that led to a peaceful solution. And when we started sharing it, people responded like you did. Oh, I never thought about that before.
Well, it's an unreasonable expectation that any conflict that I have that takes me to the point of having conflict, that if more talk more words could be thrown at it. All we're doing is hearing the bell ring, take your corners, and come out swinging, and whoever is not counted out, well, they must be the winner. And we've put this expectation on this passage and this concept of meaning you must come to a resolution. You must come to a conclusion.
And the alternate is just as unhealthy, and that is, as you alluded to earlier, fine, whatever you decide is fine with me. I can support it. And that's never a truthful statement. And so I think for an awful lot of folks, unless they have developed some communication skills, they're really sort of destined to do the merry-go-round over and over and over. A lot of people have said to us, but I don't like confrontation. And we really truly believe that confrontation is biblical, but it doesn't have to be confrontational. And confrontation, Jesus gave us lots of good examples in the Word, and my favorite is when he confronts Peter after the resurrection and asks him not once, not twice, but 3 times, Peter, do you love me? And some translations say Peter was grieved in his spirit by the time the Lord got to that 3rd inquisition. What was the point? The point was, we have work to, his answer every time was, then feed my sheep.
Right.
What he was really saying to Peter is, look, I know what you did. I told you were going to do it. It's not important to me. If you love me, we have important work to do together for the kingdom. Let's move beyond that. And so, confrontation, the woman at the well, he didn't throw it in her face, but he did it to draw her. Because in Christ's examples, his goal of confronting was to draw people to him. And if that's the goal, then the language of confrontation has to be love. A lot of times when people say, I don't like confrontation, what they really mean is, I don't like to be confronted. Mm-hmm. And so then if they're avoidant and the arguments or the conflicts are never brought to the surface, after 20 years, somebody says, check please, I'm done, I'd like to go. And they've got a laundry list of the other person's transgressions over the years. And so finding that sweet spot of honoring God in our conversation, finding agreement through understanding and listening. God gave us 2 ears, Rabbi, 1 mouth. Maybe his indication we should listen twice as often as we speak.
Amen.
But that's a hard equation to live up to.
You open the book with rules.
Yep.
You establish very clearly that there are rules.
There better be rules.
And you think about that, and somebody says, well, we love each other, we're going to do the right things about it, but the rule of law is the Bible.
It is. And that's where we start. One of the things that we learned was that we needed to have a set of commitments or agreements, some people might call them rules, about how we will engage with one another when there is conflict. We have some real simple rules. One of them is no one's allowed to get in the car and drive off. It's not safe for them, it's not safe for others on the road. Either of us can say, I need a timeout, I'm feeling a little overwhelmed, I can feel myself getting frustrated or angry and I don't want to go there, so can we take a 20-minute timeout and come back to it? And we have to be willing to grant that other person that time. They're saying, I don't want to go, or I feel like I'm headed and I need to step back and breathe a little. We need to allow them that. We didn't fight in front of our children, although, again, our home was never so large that if mom and dad were having what we like to call an intense moment of fellowship, they were aware of it. And so one of the commitments we made to ourselves and to them is that once that peace had been restored, we'd go out, we'd call those boys together and say, hey, we're sorry we brought strife into the home. We have asked for forgiveness from God, from one another, and we're good, and we need to ask you for that same forgiveness. And all of our sons have told us that that was one of the most important lessons that they learned, that conflict does not have to be a bad thing. There are better ways to handle it at times, and when you blow it, you deal with it and you move on. But you could have conflict with someone you loved and were very committed to. In fact, it could be an enhancement to the marriage, not damaging.
When you decided to take this project on, and I don't know if Abingdon Press, you pitch an idea or project to them, and then they pick and choose many different ways that publishers make their selections. Who did you have in mind? The 20-year-old married couple that had kind of hit the wall, or the premarital counseling, or was there a preconceived notion as to who the audience was going to be?
Do you know, there wasn't, and it's because conflict is an equal opportunity disturbance in every marriage. It can happen at any time. And a book that I'm working on now is called I Still Do, and it addresses the fact that while divorce has gone down in the general population by about 30% over the last 10 years, it's gone up for those over 50, about the same amount, by 30%. So although we believe that if young marrieds or even pre-marrieds have the chance to understand a healthy way to deal with conflict, because marriage is worth fighting for, but the enemy is not your spouse.
Right.
And if they can learn that early and begin to develop some skills, and the book is full of skills to help them become more capable at coming to a peaceful, God-driven solution, then if they can do that early in life, they're far less likely to fall into that 30% who divorce after 50.
Because of your corporate experience, what influence did that play? What role did that play in the concepts that you present in this book, and which ones are universally applicable, that they work in both the practical corporate marketplace and they work in the home?
Well, there are two tools that we created that are absolutely universal. And the first is a tool called Speak, S-P-E-A-K. And each of those represent an important part of the communication process. I do believe that there are folks who believe I'm either capable at communication, it's something I do well, or not, that it can't be learned. And I absolutely know that that is not the case. And so when we created Speak, S is for seek permission to have the conversation now. Sometimes timing is everything.
Yes.
That other person may have just walked through the door, it's been a tough day, and you land on them with both feet, it's not going to go well. P is present the question, the issue, the opportunity, the concern, the problem in a way that is designed to help that person understand, not to necessarily campaign for your own perspective. E is for explore some solutions. You want to hear both perspectives, and then how do we deal with this? What is this an opportunity we want to take? What are the upsides and the downsides? A is for acknowledge what you hear. And again, that talks about the importance of listening. One of the challenges is that when you've already decided where you'd like this discussion to go, you tend to listen not to understand, but to listen to find flaws or holes in the other person's rationale or their argument. You're not really looking to understand and broaden your perspective. You're looking to narrow down the holes in theirs. And lastly, the K is for keep focused on this issue. We tend to drag in the you always and you nevers. Mm-hmm. And if we can stay focused on the one issue in front of us or the one opportunity in front of us, it makes for a very different kind of conversation. Those tools are appropriate whether you're in the workforce or if you're in the home, if it's with your boss or a colleague, or whether it's with your spouse, because humans just don't have great instincts around communication. Some tools and skills make a big difference. And the other probably set of tools is understanding what the traps are. And we identified them as silence, sulking, sarcasm, and sound, meaning volume. All of those are manipulative. If I get sarcastic, if I withdraw and I refuse to contribute to the conversation and I walk around in the house for 3 days not speaking to my spouse, or if one spouse uses volume, sound, to overpower the other, those are all manipulation, and God likens manipulation in the word to witchcraft.
Absolutely.
They're not behaviors that will ever lead to a peaceable outcome.
I hear more and more a term psychological or personality-wise of narcissism or such a environment we've built that makes everything so self-centered.
Yes.
To the point of self-ease, to the point of self-indulgence, to the point of self-definition. All those things are in direct opposition and conflict to unity, to a common identity, husband and wife.
Sure.
Are you seeing that play a part? Are you
I do think
seeing a shift?
Well, we're culturally encouraged to look out for number one. Mm-hmm. Take care of yourself first. Can't take care of anyone else till you take care of others, or can't take care of others until you've taken care of yourself first. There's some truth in that. It's difficult for someone who's not healthy to help someone else become healthy. But I do think that the entitlement generation, that I should have whatever I want just because I want it, is a real danger for young marriages. If that's the case, you're in trouble. If I put Ron first and Ron puts me first, we both have a top spot, but they're in a uniform way, and both of us are subject to God. We're both submitted to God. I can easily submit to God in Ron, and he can do the same in me. But selfishness becomes very evident very, very quickly. And if you have a framework that you base your life on the Word, and that your model for life is Christ, it becomes apparent pretty quickly when selfishness begins to seek. And it's interesting because our experience is that when a priority gets out of order, it's never happy just to be the next one up on the ladder.
Right.
It wants to be all the way at the top, whether that's work or your children, whatever it might be. And unless God is at that very highest place, and that you can agree that will, if you can't agree that the Word's going to be the blueprint for your life, as Christian marriage, you're going to have a rough time. Mm-hmm. And that was our commitment from the beginning.
People misunderstand and misapply a couple of different passages of Scripture. One, Ephesians, husbands, love your wives. Wives, respect your husbands. Another one, esteem the other more than yourself.
Yep.
If you go into a marriage with a biblical expectation that I don't have to look out for myself because my spouse is doing so, and my spouse says I don't have to look out for myself because my spouse is doing so, my needs are being met because they're looking out for me, and their needs are met because I'm looking out for me, for them, that sounds like a pretty healthy, happy, balanced marriage.
It's just very difficult to accomplish. It's not easy to set your own needs aside. We do it easily for our children. It's more difficult to do it for a spouse, and I'm not sure why that's true, but it is. I will tell you that for many, many years, Ron and I lived a life that a lot of our family didn't always understand, our friends did not always understand. Ron left a very lucrative position and decided to open his own engineering firm in our home. We were raising 3 boys, and we felt like it was easier to build men than repair them later in life. I had what my kids called the real job, and it provided, the bi-monthly paycheck and the benefits and paid vacation. And a lot of people said, this is not even biblical. He's at home with the children, and he's having to help with the homework, and often he would throw in the laundry because he was there. I was traveling. But we knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that that was for a season for our sons. And all 3 of them have said that was the greatest investment you could possibly have given us. We had a male figure as a constant in our lives every single moment of every single day except when we were at school. There were times I felt left out, if I'm really honest. But we made that choice on behalf of our children, and ultimately it benefited our marriage as well. We discovered that we were abled in areas that we hadn't realized. And it worked well. It worked very well.
So when I look at how God operates universally across the Word, God blesses unity. He does not bless division. Kind of a universal theme.
Yep.
Evil divides, good unifies. Community is two words, common, unity.
Unity. Mm-hmm.
He blesses that.
He does.
He blesses the assembly. He blesses when people gather together in His name. He blesses when things are built with Him as the center. He clearly states a cord of three strands is not easily broken. When we look at all that, our knowledge of the Word says we have to find a way to bring unity. We have to find a way to bring reconciliation, because that's what you do when you are irreconciled, is you become reconciled. And this is the ministry of our new creation in Messiah, is this ministry of reconciliation, as ambassadors of reconciliation. But yet we still have this selfish part. We have maybe a minute left in this segment. One piece of advice coming from you, a giant gold nugget that lets people come to the realization that God's plan for the unity of their marriage is greater than any selfish desire that they could ever have.
Well, I guess that nugget would be to make God's Word the blueprint for your marriage. You may not always find agreement from your own experience, but there's direction in the Word, there's direction that comes through prayer, and there is a unity that happens when you pray together, making that a path and a pattern that is just an unshakable part of how you are married. It's difficult to pray for one another and then murmur about one another behind that person's back. You've gone to the Lord together. You've laid your life together before the Lord and asked for His direction. When it comes, He's faithful. He doesn't tell one person one thing and the other person something else. We might be smart. We're just never going to know it all. And that's because it comes from the Maker. It comes from the Lord. Make that blueprint, make the Word your blueprint for your marriage, and pray together daily.
Amen. Amen. Thank you for that. Deb DeArmond, Ron DeArmond, authors of Don't Go to Bed Angry, Stay Up and Fight. The message may not be to fight to the finish. The message, don't go to bed angry, find a way to resolve the anger. You can resolve the situation tomorrow.
That's it.
These are tools to equip you, not for the perfect marriage, but to line up with the marriage that God has for you. And that's as close to perfect as you're going to get. Deb, thank you so much for being with us. Thank you for sharing your story, the great work you're doing. And when that next book comes out, you make sure you come on the show and tell us all about it.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Eric.
Thank you. God bless.
God bless.
All right. That takes us to our looking at our clock, and that brings us to the end of our broadcast day for the live portion. The rebroadcast will continue until tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock a.m. Central Standard Time, when we bring you the next live edition of Revealing the Truth. Until we see you right back here in the studio, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, all kinds of places, LinkedIn. Find us all over the web, and remember, you can get to all of our guests on the Books and Media page. Get their books straight there from the Books and Media page at ignitinganation.com. Until we see you tomorrow, right back here at the Igniting a Nation Broadcasting Center, we wish you shalom.